Welcome everyone to tonight's Lean Into Allyship event. It's titled More Than Talk, DEI, which stands for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, training that challenges systems. So tonight's actually a really special night because it is actually the 2-year anniversary of this Lean Into Allyship series. So we're really excited for that milestone. And that's really because of every one of you who continue to come back month after month. So thank you for that. And as we started to think about what this series would become moving forward, we just made a couple small tweaks that we wanted to let you know of. And so we've actually changed the format of this event just a little bit. And we're actually going to have Dr. G come to every event when he's available to speak about current events or what's on his heart and mind. So for the first 10 or 15 minutes, we'll kick off with that. Then we'll go into the moderated discussion. So tonight that's going to be with Dr. Karen Reece and Harry Hawkins. And then we'll, of course, make sure that we have enough time for Q&A so you can have that live interactive dialogue with both Harry, Dr. Karen Reece, as well as Dr. G tonight. And then we'll end with a few volunteer activities or things that you can do to also educate yourself. So before we get started, though, I want to just quickly go over a couple of housekeeping things before I hand it over to Dr. G. So just 3 quick things. And the first one is just to consider donating. You hear us talk about this in every event, but consider donating to support Nehemiah because they shouldn't be putting these events on and can't put these on for free. This is on you to educate yourself. We're just lucky enough for them to be volunteering their time to do this. 2, we will be sending out a follow-up email. So you're more than welcome to take notes throughout the session, but I know there's going to be a lot that's coming through the chat tonight. So don't feel like you have to be taking notes frantically. We really want you to just sit back, take in the messages, and make sure that, again, you ask the questions because we really want you to drive the last part of this event. And then 3rd, we will be turning the chat off. I know a few of you have been able to talk with us, which is great. We will actually ask that you just message us through the Q&A moving forward, either for comments, but also throughout the event as Dr. G is talking or with Harry and Dr. Karen Reece. Please enter your questions because we will ask them as best as we can in the order in which they came through. So with that, for those who don't know Dr. G, after 2 years of this, or if you didn't know him before, this is your first event. He is the president, the founder, and the visionary for the nonprofit Nehemiah. And the vision for that organization is to engage the greater Madison community to empower African-American individuals, families, and communities to bring about hope, transformation, and justice. He has 35 plus years in this space of serving as an advisor to leaders all across the world. And one of the things that we're so thankful that he does is takes time to educate us as would-be allies as well. So with that, Dr. G, I won't take any more time. I'll turn it over to you.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. And good evening, everyone. It's hard to believe that it has been 2 years. And I would just like to take a moment to offer a special thanks to friends and for allies who've helped to make this happen. Daniel, Samantha, AJ, Lauren. Can you all just help me just to give it up for these folks who have worked behind the scenes for so long to believe in this vision? I so appreciate it. I so appreciate it. Thank you all so much. Hey, my 2 guests today are folks who are no strangers to Lean Into Allyship. They're no strangers to my orbit and my world. They're Harry Hawkins and Dr. Karen Reece, who work very closely with me in a plethora of ways and venues and organizations. Harry Hawkins is our executive vice president. He's a self-described as an implementation specialist. He's worked with Nehemiah slightly over about 5.5 years. His undergraduate degree is in business administration. And as of later this month, he will have completed his master's in transformational leadership. And so I'm really proud of that. He'll be getting that from Bakke Graduate University. Dr. Karen Reece is one of our vice presidents and VP of Research and Education. She's a brilliant scholar, thinker, and doesn't just dabble around in sciences, although her PhD is in physiology. She also has a heart for music and has a nonprofit organization and other places where she has just gotten involved to help to make sure that creative arts are not shut down for hip hop artists. And she just cares about social justice issues in general. She was making her career at Promega, where she was working as a researcher, and her heart was really to help disenfranchised folks, and found her way to Nehemiah as a volunteer. She did that for a number of years. And then we were able to find a way to bring her on board full time. And so I'm really pleased to have the 2 of them flanking me today, they have taken on the responsibility within Justified Anger of handling white allyship development, the pathways to true allyship. And they take those hits and celebrate those milestones as well. And so Lean Into Allyship group, please help me welcome Karen, Reece, and Harry Hawkins. Hey, you two, how are you doing tonight?
Doing good.
Yeah,
Dr.
doing great. I was gonna say something about the heat, but I figured by now everyone's caught on, at least if you're in the Madison area. So
Right. And
if
listen,
you're not in the Madison area, it's hot.
it is. Listen, what isn't tonight the 21st? Isn't this the longest day of the year? So from here on out, the days start getting shorter. So we are not going to talk about heat. We are not going to speak against sunshine. It can be 200 degrees tomorrow, and we're going to grin and bear it because we know what's going to happen in about 2.5 months. But we've just been working together for these years. And listen, everyone, the work of Nehemiah for the past 30 years. This year is actually our 30th anniversary. We've been around for 30 years. I've been around for 30 years. But we really have worked on leadership development strategies and empowerment strategies for the African-American family, children, youth, and families. And we have done that aptly for the past 3 decades. But in the last several years, probably since 2014, 2015, there's been a shift towards including non-Black allies into that arena because people have wanted to know what can we do to be a part of the solution. And I think we dodged that responsibility because we didn't want of answering that question because we didn't want to necessarily be hindered in our work with empowering African Americans. But then we thought long and hard and realized we have non-Black allies who are asking, how do we help to bring about systemic change? How do we start understanding ourselves? How do we become a part of the solution? And we realized those were very important questions, and we were in a unique position to begin to respond to that. So for the past several years, Nehemiah, through its initiative, Justified Anger, has really focused on how we help non-Black allies, with a special focus on white allies, to use position, power, privilege, to help to undermine these systems that are continually causing issues in society today. And we're here to talk a little bit about this. I know I usually give more of a little intro, but I think this is such an intriguing topic that I didn't want to take time away from that in order to talk with these folks. So let me just start off by just asking something real general. Harry, you grew up in the South. You're from the DC area, but you came of age in Atlanta. One of the Black havens, of the Northern Hemisphere, Western Hemisphere. But you're in Wisconsin, and your children are in the Oregon school district. And you are helping white people with cats wrestle with issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who would have thunk it? Did you see this coming, that this would be part of your work in really developing and creating strategies for would-be white allies?
No. My every now and then, like just what was it, Monday, I was driving down the road and saw a sign that said caution, turtle and duck crossing. And I was like, man, I live in the country. And it just blows my mind every now and then because it's just crazy to me. So no, had no clue that I was going to be doing this work. And honestly, I don't think it wasn't until I began to get in the orbit of Nehemiah that I even understood I could be impactful in this work.
Wow. Dr. Reece, how about you? Did you see yourself doing this as you were working away in those male-dominated laboratories on campus and in, Promega? Did you see yourself really becoming an advocate for cross-cultural relationships and for non-Black allyship development?
Yeah, absolutely not at this level. I never would have seen this coming as my full-time job. I always, would pick up that conversation or do things related to social justice and racial justice in my other roles, but it was an add-on. It certainly wasn't what, pays my bills and what I wake up and go to sleep thinking about. So.
And I know we're going to get into some of the day-to-day and nuts and bolts of that. And this is sort of an obvious question, but I want people to hear your hearts. Why is this work so important right now? And you can please go in any order you'd like.
I think
the work of helping allies, not just the work of talking about race, but helping allies. Why is that so important right now?
Well, that could be a long question. I'll try to answer quickly. I think it's so important because people who don't want this work done are active and mobile. They're mobilizing, they're doing things, they're vocal. So if the people who want change, who want things to be different, don't do anything, all they have to do is do nothing, and these problems will not only persist but just get worse.
Mm.
And the comment I just made about doing this occasionally as an add-on before I worked at Nehemiah, did that help in a few places? Did that change minds in a few places? Maybe. But I wasn't out there actively doing the work, and certainly not doing as much as I could, which is not to say people don't have to do this at their full-time job. But it's so important for us to do this right now with everything that is going on in current events. We really do have a groundswell of interest and awareness about these issues. So it's prime time to help people figure out what can they really do to make that impact.
Sure. One of the things that I really appreciate about my team, and I'm speaking to the Lean Into Allyship audience, is that it's a very cross-cultural team, and we learn together and we learn from each other, and we're growing because of each other and in spite of each other. We continue to grow, but for true reconciliation to happen, for true transformation, we need people who help us to understand how we got here and how we move away from here. This work really grew out of a vision I had to teach U.S. Black history. And many of you have benefited from that class, Black History for a New Day. And the program that Harry and Karen lead is really some of the next steps. People have said, well, we need more. We want to take this home. Like, how do we talk about this? And I also want to say that we've had over 4,000 registrants of this course over the past several years, 4,000 folks, and over 3,000, I would say, Karen's a factoid. Karen, over 3,000 have completed it.
Yep.
So that's well over 75% completion rate. And that's really, that's fantastic. And you catch something when you go through it. Like when you go to the dentist, you may not like it, but you're going to leave with some benefit if you stayed there for the whole appointment. And so people may not always get it. I don't necessarily see fluoride, but when I go to the dentist, I leave with something. And so I'm appreciative that thousands of people in this community have gone through this process. And so not only do Karen and Harry help me to facilitate that process and facilitate the instructors and creating an online platform for it, but the next step for organizations who want to do this, it's school districts. We actually have a municipality as a client, an entire city where we work, our team works with some of the leaders of departments. It's really fairly amazing. And what I love about it is that many times when people want to talk about race in this community, they hire firms that don't look like me and Harry to talk about hiring people who look like me and Harry. And then they call people like me and Harry for free advice once they've paid people who look like Karen to help them understand the work. And one day I just made a post and just said, I'm so tired of white organizations hiring white people to talk about diversity, then calling me for a cup of coffee to pick my mind on diversity for free. And so I really appreciate our approach to really stepping and moving into these discussions and these conversations. What I've found is that oftentimes people want to be placated, or they want their plans rubber stamped. They want to say, I'm a good person, right? Like if there were a more diverse pool, I would hire them, right? Like you agree, it's hard because I'm in Wanakee, right? It's hard, I'm in this space. And that's not what Karen and Harry come in to do. They come in to really hold up a mirror and to really help people to understand that this is our opportunity to be a great society for everyone, to change the trajectory for Black and brown people and people of color in this community. And so let me just start off by just asking the first question. And I'll throw these out. So don't feel like each of you has to answer. If it's relevant and you want to, you can, but don't feel like Karen and now you. How do you encourage yourself to jump back in this work day after day, when craziness happens? Like, what's going to help you get up tomorrow and do this? This being training non-Black allies to think about their role in dismantling and transforming systems that impede the progress of people of color.
For me, it's just amazing to see the little changes. So the work can be frustrating, but overall, it's watching people's minds open up. We obviously use a lot of history and facts in the work that we do. And so seeing people kind of put puzzle pieces together that before they didn't really have anything to connect the dots. And we give that information and they see it, and then connecting that with lived experience, you can't argue with that. And so we see the full range of emotion on people's faces and in their body language and in what they say, where they're realizing things that they thought they knew or were raised to believe their entire lives is not exactly what they thought it was. And so it's really rebuilding that. So for me, what keeps me going is to see that change happening in people.
Yeah, I would say for me, the piece that keeps me going on a daily basis are really my kids, my youngest niece, who's 5. But I really want this world to be a better place for them. And there's no place that I can send my kids that racism is not going to be a problem. Or if you go outside of the US, oppression of some sort that follows the same pathway is not present, right? So the only thing to do then is to face it. So if I can do something to help make that better, even if it's just a little bit, then that's great. And the training allows that impact to be really, hopefully, something that becomes just a swell, right? That people pick up and kind of do that on their own. So for me, I would say I want to make a difference, but I want to make a difference for my kids, because I can walk away from somebody that I know, like, forget y'all, I'm tired of this. But I can't really just walk away from that desire I have for my kids to live in a better place.
That's good. Karen, so you work for Nehemiah, right?
Yes.
And you've been here for how many years?
8 full-time.
And what's the ethnicity of your boss?
Black.
And what's the ethnicity of your boss's boss?
Black.
So you're unique in the fact that you're a white woman and you're a black man who works for a black man. Do people ever pull you to the side and ask you for the skinny on working for black people? You didn't know this question was coming, but you're in the family, so we got to put this. Dude, over the years, have people pulled you together and just say, "Come on, Karen, what's like? Is it really difficult? Do you feel like the minority? Like, do you ever feel like people ask you for a white perspective in what's seen as a predominantly black organization?"
Absolutely, but they do that in an entirely passive manner.
Like
I would never come right out and ask.
Give me an example.
I
mean, not a specific, but like the way they do it passively.
Yeah, more just like asking what the day-to-day is like, and so how do you do that? Or, when we talk about time, for example, as a value in our trainings, people are always dying for us to really explain. So is Nehemiah on time? So it's just those little questions and hinting. Now, I'd say most people, it probably isn't even on their radar that it would be different. So a lot of folks are just, and this, we talk about this in our training also, a lot is, we assume the status quo is the way you do things, the way things are done. And if people haven't been exposed cross-culturally, then they don't even know to ask that question. So, I've had a few people that are closer to me that will kind of hint at that, or, how are decisions made, or, oh, that's an interesting direction, or something like that. But the vast majority, it's not even on the radar that it would be different.
That's really interesting. In the past, Karen, like, there have been issues, staffing issues come up irrespective of what people's ethnicity may be. But there are times where something's happened and I've just said, Karen, what the hell? And you said, help me understand. You said, well, here's a dynamic with white women with advanced degrees, or here's a dynamic that may happen. It helped me to realize that you're not just here continuing to grow about understanding about the Black experience, but you actually help us to understand our white donors, our white staff, our white clients, our white board members, our white allies. You help to bring a perspective that's very honest, and we can trust that it's not laden with some type of, anger. You're not trying to get rid of your ethnicity, and your ethnicity is not white. We understand that, but you're comfortable in your skin, and you know the strengths of it. But you're also up to help us to understand as we navigate a very cross-cultural world. White employers miss that opportunity when they don't have Black people in key places. They don't have people who help them to understand themselves and their own biases, but also to understand how they can interact with people differently. So you not only help white staff understand Black leadership, you help Black leadership understand white staff. And that's an enviable position. And if Black people and people of color were not so pigeonholed in the workforce, we could do that for employers too, if people thought we had the intelligence and the skills to do that. Does that
and if the white leader recognizes that's a thing. So that's I can talk about this because I've gone through it myself, and I've made the mistakes that I'm giving insight, or I've held those thought processes that I'm giving insight to. That's why I can do that here. A lot of people, even if they do have Black leadership in their businesses, haven't had that experience. Again, haven't had many, if any, meaningful cross-cultural relationships. So it's that awareness that, there is a different way of interpreting things. There is a different worldview. So on one level, it's just that complete lack of awareness. On the other level, absolutely right, trusting that someone who's not the boss can provide that kind of insight to move the company forward.
And I know these are different from like your day-to-day DEI discussion, but this is interesting because I want people to really understand your work. Harry, one of the things that you've done as my executive vice president, which I really respect, that you've created a compensation structure so that just because someone has advanced degrees doesn't mean that they're more valuable to the company than someone who may not. But that person without degrees may raise more money, may oversee more staff, and wield greater public leadership inside of our community. But you did it in a way so that people who do have advanced degrees don't feel left out. A lot of people want diversity, but they don't want to be ballsy enough to really make things in an even playing field. I mean, I can't tell how many places you work that if you have an associate degree, you start at this level. But if you get your bachelor's, they'll bump you up. If you get your master's. But your point was, well, no one asked you to go to get an MSSW in social work in order, to be our grant writer. Like that's not a requirement to write grants. And so we can't just bump you up because you went and got that degree. And so now we got to help you pay off your grants. You thought creatively, and listen, I've been the CEO of this organization for 30 years. I've never thought about that. Never thought about how you pull that off. And not sure that I would have ever given it any thought had you brought that point up. I bring it up, Harry, because when you practice that, you can push other executives and organizations to say, well, I don't know if we can do that. Yeah, you can. That's why you got C-suite in your card. That's why you got chief in front of your title. That's why you have a little, key card that lets you all over this place. It's why you get 6, weeks of vacation and 6 figures. And stop acting like you can't make things change. You just made that happen. You recommended it to me and said, this is what I think we need to do. And my first thought was, how are the people with advanced degrees going to think? And then you reminded me, if we want the best and the brightest to get this done, and we want people with cultural relevance and lived experience, they can't be the hired help coming in the back door. What are we going to do? Are we going to hire them or not? And I just thought that was brilliant. Did you see that someplace else, Harry? Or is that all your brainchild? I mean, another agency doing it, or was that just something you just thought, I'm in a position of power, this is fair, I'm going to do it?
No, I don't know anybody else who does it. Typically, most HR offices are there to really keep the, and this is a gross generalization, but they're there to keep the organization or the company out of a lawsuit. But the way they hire is, and you can see this from the job ad, it's really operating on an assumption of exploitation, right? So, your pay is based on experience, or, there's some positions that makes sense for, but not every position. So the fact that if I look at a job and they won't tell me how much I'm going to make, they won't tell me what I am going to get, I already know haven't been thinking about me. They just want what they want, and they want to pay me as little as possible so they can give me a raise as I go so that I stay happy. Most organizations don't have no idea how to keep employees engaged. So they try and give them trinkets, a 1% raise, or, we will give you another benefit. And they really haven't really even figured out why those employees are there. And so that's what we started with, was what makes people want to be here, who thrives. And if you offer that to people, then you give them a pay that you can afford, that's fair as much as it can be, and let them know that up front, like, hey, here's where we are. Here, if you want to do this work, this is what we can afford to pay you. And that's the reality you're going to be living. For some people, they go, I appreciate the opportunity, but that won't work for me. And we go, no problem, I understand. And some people are like, I'm going to make it work. I'm going to figure it out. But yeah, for me, if you aren't willing to have an equitable pay scale, and we're still evolving that, mind you, like we haven't landed at some perfect solution to that. So in case somebody's like, man, what's he doing? We're attempting to be equitable how we pay people. And so as that's growing, the fact that we were willing to work with that and to even play around with it, I think says a lot to our employees. And because they're like, okay, they're attempting to do something. And most people will talk diversity, but they don't want that diversity to hit their pocket. They're not willing to give up any money to make it work.
Right. That's powerful. Hey, I have a two-part question that I'd like each of you just to take a stab at, and you can choose who goes first, and you can split it up or what have you. I'm just going to turn my screen off for just a minute after I ask it. But it's when you come into these companies, they want us to either do traditional diversity training or implicit bias, and those are not things that we do. We want people to really understand the systemic reality of what's happening and how we address that. So can you both just take a few minutes to address, what do we mean when we talk about systemic racism? What is a system? And why is it such a difficult concept for organizations to grasp when they say they really want change? So if you all can just take a few minutes just to address what is a system, and why is that concept so difficult, making it so difficult for companies or even societies to see real change?
You want to go first, Karen?
Sure. So a system is basically everything that goes into something to make it work. So in an organization, we're talking about having an office, there's a system that brings in your IT. How do you hire people? How do you promote people? How do you hold meetings? How do you choose collaborators? How do you market your material? All these processes put together create a system, and all those pieces work together. A lot of times when we talk about making change, we think about it in very technical terms. So we always go to the example of the broken stool, three-legged stool. One leg breaks, you can't sit on it, but really all you need to do is to get some super glue or, a nail and a hammer, put that leg back on there and you're good. Unfortunately, these kinds of, or any system doesn't work like that. If one part breaks, it's going to affect how the other processes in that system run, and it's going to throw it off. So not only do you have to fix that one part, but that was broken, you have to go back and adjust all the other areas that were offset by that one process that went off. And so it's, really similar when we're doing this kind of training. Is you can't expect to just teach people one aspect of the work and then automatically it applies to all of our complex systems that keep our companies going. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah, and I would say, and this is typically how we will do our trainings, we'll kind of tag team. But I'll use an analogy because I love using stories in our trainings. And a lot of times we get called in to address a certain system or pain point, right? So somebody says, and I use like exercising. It's like if you go to the trainer and say, hey, I want to get in shape so I can be ready for my vacation or something like that. You're like, okay, well, we can help you. We can't guarantee you'll be ready by your vacation, but we can help you get in shape. And what the person's expecting is that I'm going to come in and give them a workout routine. Like, here's your workout routine. Do so many push-ups, so many sit-ups, and so many pull-ups. And if you do this three times a week, you'll be good. Instead, what we do is we come in, we look at, your body mass index. We want to talk about your diet. We want to know, about your emotional state, because that's going to impact your eating and your diet. And we want to know about your stress levels. We want to know about your routines and, what's keeping you from exercising and getting healthy, because we know if we can get you thinking properly and eating properly and addressing some of your emotional issues, and finding the right mix of routine and schedule, we can get you exercising, right? Finding an exercise routine is easy, right? They're free and available all across the place. But answering the question, why are you not happy with your body? What type of workout will get you excited? Why are you eating the way you do? Like, those are questions people don't want to talk about, because we got to get in your business. And so when people come in, they say, oh, they're just going to give us a workout routine. And they're like, so tell me about your feelings, right? How many slices of cake did you eat yesterday? They're like, oh, what? No, he didn't. Don't talk about the cake, not the cake. Right? Leave that cake alone. That's not why we hired you. And so it's so hard, because this issue requires personal transformation. If you're a CEO, you're a leader, a manager, and you have a problem, right? A productivity issue, a supply chain problem, you have an employee who needs to perform better. All those things are external issues where you can address them. Somebody does something and it creates a solution. This training requires you at some point to lean in and realize that you have been complicit, that you have been impacted by the things that cause this problem, and you have been some of the problem causing in your system. And that's a reality that a lot of people do not want to deal with, because that takes them to a place where they are uncomfortable. They feel like a novice, or somebody who is really, they don't want to be a learner again. They're experts in their field. They're great at their job. They don't like that feeling of discomfort and of being a novice again. So it's really a challenge to that personal identity. And that's what makes it so hard.
Yeah. And to that point, when we think about professional development, most of that is, we talk about work-life balance. So usually we go to work, we come home, we have our personal life, and most professional development is just like that. So you need to be trained on a certain skill that helps in the workplace. You learn that specific skill, you use it in the workplace, you go home, it might influence you, but you don't have to do that at home. When we're talking about diversity, equity, inclusion, or we're talking about racism and racist beliefs and thought process, and you can throw bias in there if that feels better, that's not something that you can separate from your personal code of beliefs and code of ethics. We bring these things to work with us. The reason these systems are upheld in this way is because it's people that are part of the processes and part of the systems bringing their racist views to put it all together. So when we're leading these trainings, it requires you to go back to what you learned when you were a little kid, or what you were taught in school, or the way you've rationalized the way the world works, and confront your own personal belief system so that you can make change in your workplace. And that's scary. It's not easy.
But that's also the true work. I mean, that's how we bring about change. I mean, when one of the most common questions that's asked of us is, haven't we beaten this? Like, haven't we done this already? Aren't we better than this? But we talk about what we capitalize, what we say. We worry about the small things that don't really matter. But then when it comes with how we've learned these things and lived them out, people don't want to talk about that. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. What I've told organizations is, you train people thinking they're never really going to need this. Like, I'm of an age where I remember air raid drills, because I grew up, I was a kid, and, the threat of the Cold War was real. And so I was in elementary school having fire drills and air raid drills. I didn't even understand what an air raid was, but I knew something would be coming out of the sky, and it was frightening. But they just wanted us to do this. They wanted to make sure we knew how to react. But did we really think that, the Soviet Union, someone's going to bomb schools? They could. Maybe that's part of the propaganda, but it never happened. But yet we had all those drills. just so that we could be safe. I don't think employers take on DEI issues. They treat it like it's something that's not really going to happen. Like, we don't really have issues here. We wouldn't treat anyone poorly here. We don't tell racial jokes here. Like, this would not be a problem here, but we want to do it just to show ourselves clean, to make sure no one thinks that we're racist. But what I've said to employers is, you haven't taken into consideration that you've hired people that have lived an entire life before they came to work for you. And you're not considering what they've done, what they said, where they've been, and the impact of that. So for you just to throw out information to people like, this isn't relevant, but we want to talk about it so we can say we talked about it, without thinking, former Capitol Chief of Police, Charles Tubbs told me Wisconsin has one of the fastest growing rates of hate crimes, white hate crimes in the country. But yet we're hiring people as if they're not influenced by, related to, connected with some of these folks. And so the work has to assume that people have been infected by this. And I sometimes describe racism that way. We sometimes have talked about our fish being sick in our lakes because of the phosphorus and the algae. And they're not sick because the fish are bad. They're sick because the water is polluted. And even if you stock, the lake with brand new fish, you grow them at the fish hatchery here in Fitchburg and take them out to the lakes and say, go, be free, little fish. Eventually they're going to get sick too, because the sickness is in the water and they're swimming in the water. So folks who struggle with racism are not people who are necessarily bad people. But there are people who are hurt themselves by the racism because of what it's stolen from them, the fear it's instilled inside of them. But you're not a racist because of what you've done. You're a racist. Racism happens because of how you've been lied to, how you've been shaped, how you've been acculturated, how you've been developed, how you've been indoctrinated under the guise of, this is just the American way. This is just the good life. This is just the American dream. So when we don't dismantle it or train like it's really in people, we let people off and the problem persists. I didn't mean to talk that long, but does that make sense?
Yeah, that's real. And I think a lot of when we first come into organizations, it comes back to that awareness. So people are very aware of personal and interpersonal racism, not necessarily what they've done, but they're aware of what the definition is. It's not so clear what systemic and structural racism are because we haven't learned our comprehensive history. So it's hard to see. That's where you get into systems, is looking at how we've moved through history and these kinds of things that have developed. So there are a lot of people who have seen what's unfolded in the country and who have read books on the issue. So they understand it's happening, but they have no idea how, why, or where. And so when they ask us to come in, I don't think it's on anyone's radar where we might have to dig or what layers we might have to pull back to do that. And I think that's what makes this work different than others.
Now, I would also say that a lot of organizations have fallen into the trap of expecting change to happen in an easily reportable manner. So they expect to be able to report at a quarterly, board meeting about, we spent this money, here's our ROI. And people, first of all, no problems fit nicely into quarterly reporting frameworks. But the other issue is, because people have pushed that so often, people expect you to be able to say, okay, the next 12 months, we're going to do this training, we're going to pay this money, and what are we going to get on the other end of the 12 months? And so they want to be able to make this report back to the people who make the decisions that this problem has been taken care of. And this is, we found through our work, it takes a minimum of 9 to 12 months to get ready for change, right? So we're not even talking about the change itself, but just to get a group of people ready to change, for change, it takes minimum of 9 to 12 months.
Because if they don't do that, Harry, it's not sustainable, correct?
Right, exactly. Because and the reason why it's not sustainable is because you don't have a firm foundation to really do that work.
So there isn't the understanding, like, what do we mean when we say diversity? What does racism look like? Where are there inequities in our process? And so it really takes that amount of time for us to talk through those issues. We're going to hit some personal landmines. We're going to hit some feelings. And we build into our training process to be flexible so that when we do hit those sore spots, we can pause, redirect, and dig in so we're able to unravel that. What happens if people jump right into setting goals and trying to change without that first step is either the efforts will just be sort of check the box initiatives, or there'll be nice things that happen, but not really sustainable. Or they might actually cause more harm than good because the understanding isn't there about what needs to actually change.
I'm sorry. I know that what we found in some of our trainings is that you might have a very sensitive or woke CEO or executive or DEI vice president. And because the right things are stated, the goals are published, there are notices on the wall, there's the assumption that it really permeates the organization. And that takes time. So not only does it take time to get ready for it, because part of it is readying people for that trickle down effect. People think that because they're in leadership and they're woke, they get it, that it will move to others through osmosis. And it's a process. So can you all talk a little bit about why it's not just enough for the individual wokeness? And let's just say we're not using wokeness facetiously. Let's just say as an individual who's gone through the history class, they've done the stuff we've asked them to do. They've educated, they believe in education, donation, affiliation. They're doing the things, and we look at them and say, wow, they're an ally. Let's have someone like Daniel, Samantha, people we worked with for years. But if they don't see that they have a responsibility, not that it's necessarily their personal responsibility, but it's not enough just to say, well, I'm not racist, I'm good. But that if they see examples of it in the system and they're in positions to speak and share, it's not just enough to say, I'm good, we're cool. That for true change, for people to be true allies, their own personal awakening is really, it really should instigate more of a systemic dominoes effect.
Yeah, I think even for people who are actively working on it, if they're still thinking through the framework of this dichotomous framework of I'm good and someone else isn't, they don't even understand how they are still part of the problem. Because this is not a matter of me having anyone having enough learning or activity to not be racist. The issue is because what you're saying is what you're saying is I'm in a place where I can say with some level of assurance that I am having a positive impact on other people. And as far as I know, we don't have any way to measure our impact on others internally. And so what happens is if somebody tells me that they're good and other people are the problem, they've had they're maybe moving, but they're at a lower level of allyship than they think. And that actually is probably one of the biggest reasons why we don't see the osmosis happening. Because if you created a culture where these sort of things were common, it was expected, then you would have people that would be able to pick up and learn some of these habits just by being around. But what happens is a lot of people engage in this work so they won't be racist, right? Instead of saying, how do I make an impact? How can I work on myself and not do damage? And so what happens is when you have a CEO who thinks that because they believe something and they said it and they told me it was your job, or a leader who says the same thing, that now that's the rule. Not only are they not going to make an impact in diversity and inclusion, they actually don't understand how work gets done in their organization. Because, and I say that as a middle manager for most of my career, because you can get the best and most amazing plans from corporate office or from the C-suite. But if you don't have those people who are kind of your cultural pillars, if they don't adopt that new thing and help bring it to life, it'll just exist in the boardroom. It will never be a part of what you do. So the reason why it has to be something that goes beyond just the leader's, kind of soundbite is because you need people to believe in it and embody it. so it becomes part of your culture. And I think that's the piece that is, even goes back to your previous question, why this work is so hard, because particularly here in the Midwest, most people have never had to wrestle with what is our corporate culture, what is our organizational culture, and how is that different or synonymous with Midwestern white culture, right? Those two things in many cases, in many places, are synonymous. And so I would say that if you want true change at an organizational level, you have to change the culture, right? And and for that to happen, that's not a one person. Okay, who you are, how dynamic you are, that's bigger than one person.
That's huge. That's really important. You know, there are people out here whose organizations talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or you notice that when your company does hire someone, the folks are white and don't understand what it's like to be on the receiving end of racism. And it's hard to really talk about this from lived experience. And so if you are in HR or you have a good connection with the HR person, or you're part of a employee resource group, and you would like to see how Nehemiah may offer some training for you, Don is dropping Dr. Reece's contact information in the mail. You can just shoot us an email and just say, how do we begin talking about this? How do we begin getting someone to help us move ahead? But keep in mind, this is not a team just to have you come in by just giving a speech. This is not folks you probably want to call during February, Black History Month, or on Juneteenth Day. These are folks who can really help you think differently in a way that will not only help your organization, but also help your own lives and also help with your own relationships. I want to be mindful of how we interact with the audience, because you all come here so that you can learn and lean in and ask questions. And so I'm just going to invite Dan and company back to the screen just to ask a few questions that we're getting out of the chat room. And then I'll be back at the end just to thank everyone for showing up. But Daniel, I'm passing the baton to you, young man.
Sounds great, Dr. G. So because of where we just ended with the conversation about, if you have that woke CEO or woke VP or people who think they get it, and then Harry, to what you just talked about and you need to change the culture. There was a question that came in just recently, almost on the inverse of this, and it's an anonymous attendee, but their fear is that companies with poor leadership, they never get this DEI message. And so how can employees address this if the company culture is truly top-down management? So if the top doesn't get it, how do you start to embed this from the bottom up, or maybe mid-level down?
I would say that regardless of your management structure, there are always going to be points of impact and influence. And so, you have like your water cooler counselors, you have your champions of culture that get people involved in company events and things like that. So there are multiple levels, different types of leadership that we see in any organization. And typically what we work on is trying to really, wherever the path of least resistance is, start there. So if your CEO is not on board, don't worry about trying to get the CEO on board. If you are the CEO, don't try to convince people who aren't convinced. Start with people who are like-minded, and then begin to create bonds and create culture change there. And then what happens is that kind of radiates out and draws people into that framework. So for instance, it's like when you're, if you ever go to a coffee shop and you're having a conversation and you start laughing, people automatically just kind of want to be, what are they laughing about? Oh gosh, I want to have fun too. What are they doing? And so you have those things, like culture will work that way. And that's a very short answer for a complicated process, but start where you have some synergy. And we actually recommend that people start small and grow it over time, then do big, grand trainings, because those typically don't have nearly as much impact. And it's taking a small amount of resources with a small group of people and really getting them equipped and challenged, or equipped and permission to act.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Carrie. I will say we had quite a few questions similar to that. We had questions from Leah that asks about how can I promote an inclusive culture at work if I'm not in senior leadership that is mostly male and white. Another conversation from Alex where they shared our workplace DEI team is all white. We have very few people of color in the workplace. So just reiterating, how do we get their input about what needs to change without burdening them was the question. So just reiterating that this is, clearly a shared barrier, that a lot of allies in training and would-be allies, and the attendees here tonight are looking for like additional insight, I think, and support and resourcing on. So maybe something we can revisit if we have more time, but I wanted to just acknowledge those great follow-up questions as well. And I was hoping to pop back up to earlier in the Q&A. The first question we had was from Catherine, and she asked, has Nehemiah's model admission been seen and used by other municipalities, areas in this country? Is word getting out? Has your Zoom platform allowed your amazing work to branch out? It was so exciting to hear that really broad number with the Black History course earlier in the session. And we know that, you are truly the experts, and we have, heard tonight about how you value the investment and that is the focus. So I think that's a great question to dive a little further into. Dr. Reece?
Yeah, the virtual world has really, ripped a lot of doors off hinges in terms of what our reach is. And we've actually had people from, I think, about 8 different states participate in Black History for a New Day also. So it's really exciting to see that broad reach. We do have a couple Wisconsin specific lectures in there. And we hope over the next 5 years or so that we could maybe start developing some location specific lectures to put in there. But because we were able to go virtual, we were able to continue our training work throughout the pandemic. It wasn't always obvious right away what to do. And certainly there's dynamics that you can't get in a virtual setting. It's harder to gauge body language. Small groups are harder because usually when we're in the room, Harry and I would be walking around and kind of ear hustling at each of the tables or making sure folks are on task or at answering questions. And we all know how the breakouts go on Zoom. Like some people are into it, others log off immediately. But I think it really, and to be honest, one habit that worked well the last couple of years, but certainly isn't sustainable, is that being on Zoom allowed us to book more things into the same day. So in that sense, we were able to reach more people. We probably won't continue that exact pace, but it did help. And that's been really exciting just to see how a resource we never thought would be possible before the pandemic was able to blast us open.
Yeah, no doubt. Would you be able to share, so your upcoming courses, are they virtual? Are they hybrid? Can you share a little detail just for?
Sure. Yeah. A Black History for New Day will remain virtual. We're looking at whether we can bring that. I think we'd like to bring it back in person for a local group, but it will remain in a virtual setting because we're able to offer it to so many more people. Our organizational trainings, that's turning out to depend more on the organization. So some groups have gotten really used to the Zoom meeting, get better attendance and better engagement, and other groups are just really itching to get back to that in person. So our different trainings really depend on what group we're working with.
Cool. Thank you for that. I can give a personal testimonial as a Black History for a New Day virtual attendee earlier in the pandemic. It was so well executed and facilitated. The breakouts did not feel, forced. It's so all encompassing from, soul deep. The Zoom fatigue is not even a consideration, from my personal experience taking it. So if there's any hesitation, you guys rock it in the Zoom setting. So
thanks. That's good to hear.
Awesome. And so Allison actually had a question following that early on in the event, talking about just how does the dynamic change basically based on the makeup of the organization. So it's a 2-part question. So how does the training dynamic change, if at all, depending on the race of the audience? And then how do the two of you address internalized racial dynamics that might come up in your professional relationships, as you work together in delivering and, planning the training and the learning opportunities?
Yeah, I would say I'll answer the second one first. So I think really Karen and I start our work together from a place of trust, and what I mean by that is, because that sounds like, oh, that's so great. Yeah, it means that we call each other out on our crap, right? And you take it. And that doesn't mean you take it perfectly. Like, you're like something like, no, that's not me. You're like, dang, that is me. Okay. Got you. Okay, my bad. I got to go work on that. So I think one is being able to be honest with each other, and willing to be corrected by one another, right? And so those two things build that trust. And then what happens is that fuels our training, right? Because now we can go and say, hey, guess what happened? Here's this thing that we experienced, right? And so that third piece gets to the first part of the question, is really transparency, because regardless of the makeup of the group, we go in with the idea that we're going to understand a little bit more about this group. We know there's some basic things like teaching history, having that historical grounding framework, some best practices when it comes to how to handle facilitations or tough conversations. There's just some run-of-the-mill everyday things that you kind of have in your toolkit. But really, it's teaching people to be transparent, right? Because if you can't be transparent, if you're not willing to be wrong and still be in relationship with others who are also sometimes wrong, then you can't do the work, right? The issues we have can be navigated. The real challenge is, are we willing to do the work? Are we willing to put our heart on the table? And so a lot of our teaching points people in that direction. And we use our own experiences to really disarm people's defenses. Because it's one thing for me to say, if you're white, you might be racist, blah, 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 versus me saying, hey, look, let me tell you how Karen ate my lunch because I was being sexist with older white women who were being racist. I didn't check them because I was scared they might start crying. And Karen's like, that's sexist. I'm like, oh, my pearls, no, are you kidding me? Can't be, but then it's like, when she explained to me, it is, and here's the reason why, I'm like, oh my Lord, I'm sexist. I'm like, oh no, I got to go fix that. So all of a sudden you're like, oh gosh, he's human. And if I just gave myself a label, guess what? I don't mind labeling you either. But guess what? You're in good company though, right? At least you're not you're not alone. You can still be a good human. You can still be a good person with a few flaws, right? You got a few spots and wrinkles, but it's all right. You don't have to stay that way. And so for us, it's really a continuum, I think, of doing that work to have good relationships personally and also within the greater Nehemiah workforce, and then using those experiences to help other people connect to what we're training.
Absolutely. And the question about the different dynamics in the room, our process doesn't change too much based on the racial composition of the room, because again, we operate from a framework, so we know what, and not like a very exactly minute by minute detailed agenda, because we want to be able to be responsive to the dynamics in the room. So each company race is one of those factors, but just one has their own personality and their own culture. So when we come in, we're really looking to be guides to help the people in the room identify the pieces that make up their culture, because most of us haven't thought about what that means or what that looks like. And so, we kind of move along with the way that people are responding and interacting together in the room to move our training forward.
Excellent, thank you. Another related question that I think comes up often, I think definitely here in the Midwest, is a question we've seen come up in these sessions before when talking about DEI. The question is, our workplace DEI team is all white. We have very few people of color in the workplace. How do we get their input about what needs to change without burdening them? Dr. G has definitely touched on this over the past 2 years in different sessions. But I think that this responsibility versus opportunity conversation, would just love to hear from both of you on that.
Well, I think, oh, Pastor, you about to jump in?
No.
Oh, okay.
I want to just hear this.
In trouble? Did you come on?
I think part of it is, one, I would say white people are smart. So some of the stuff you can figure out, right? People don't, there whatever process you use to figure out if you should buy GameStop stock when you heard about it on the news, you're like, wait, I'm sorry, what's happening, right? If you've been trying to figure out if you have an NFT you can sell, you're like, can I sell one of those before it becomes illegal? Like, can I do that? Like, you can figure some stuff out. So some of it is you can do some of that work, right? The other piece I think is, one, we have to realize that diversity, equity, inclusion has a lot to do, less to do with my input and more about who are you as an organization. So because we don't have a ton of time to go into it, if you want to know more, look up employee engagement, because I could talk for hours on that topic alone. Because really what I was talking about is how do people really get engaged with their work, right? One of the things that we did, and I hate when people ask me what our diversity plan is, because we don't have a diversity plan. What we do is we hire people for the right reasons, and we get a diverse group because we do that. And so what that means is that we found that people who work for Nehemiah are people who have respect for the leader and believe in the mission. And so and then we also look for transferable skills. So yes, you might have been a sous chef, but did you learn something that might be transferable into this space? So you take those ideas and you put together. What ends up happening is you get a diverse staff. And a lot of people, if you know, I'll give you a test so I won't go on too long. If you're not exactly sure what you're making people included into, like you don't know what he said, we're going to be inclusive. You're including people into what? If you can't answer that question, then you might need some help, right? And I mean outside help. So maybe your first step is not going to your Black people or your brown people, whoever you're trying to include. Maybe you need somebody to help you think through that, because you can't have people included in something and you don't even know what it is you're including them into.
Wow, thank you, Harry. That was great. Another question had come in as well from Janina, which, you mentioned how both of you have hit on that, how you do this differently than the, unconscious bias or just a quick training that you check off in the system. How do you go about moving employers away from that short-term thinking into that long-term, viewpoint, to take that larger, broader, long-term type of thinking, when most organizations, and I think you've already hit on it, require some sort of ROI and a quick turnaround? They need to make sure that they see that investment and what's come out of that. How do you get them to just get almost to the starting line in 9 to 12 months and really sink in for that sustainable change?
I mean, it doesn't always happen right away. So this is something that usually comes up in the relationship building process. So I don't think we've ever had someone reach out to us and then the next day we have a signed training contract. We have several meetings with folks to determine if we're even the right people to work with them, because we do this in a specific way. We work for impact. So we want to make sure that the time we're putting in is going to have a real lasting impact on the organization. So we've already had those conversations leading up to signing that contract. And, if someone says, we need a more diverse workforce, our conversation in those planning meetings is going to be, okay, that's maybe a 5-year plan. To get to that, what do we need to do first, and start unpacking that? And some people get on board right away, and some people still think, yeah, but we're really, show me why that's not right. And when we really start to dig in those conversations about the organizational culture, or what the viewpoints are, it becomes pretty quickly obvious, I think, to folks that there are more layers and it is more complicated than they thought. One of the things that we do offer is that we do a feedback form after each session. And so we have just a couple quick check boxes. Is this valuable? Did your small group work for you? Can you, look through a new lens with this? so we can get that quick quantitative kind of measure. But then we have open-ended questions. What else do you want to tell us, and what do you want us to work on? And that's where we get individuals who didn't feel safe enough to say things. These are anonymous, so didn't feel safe enough to say something during the training, but have very valid points and questions. And then we meet with the leadership in between these monthly sessions so we can unpack that and plan for the next training. So again, it's a framework. It's designed to be responsive to those issues. And so building that relationship, building the trust is how we get there.
And I'll just add to this, and then you might have to take it back to go into detail with this one. But I would say, too, we try to be very upfront about what the organization wants to achieve and what we believe it will take to get there. And so part of that is an assessment that we do before we do any work. Karen does an assessment to really just say, hey, where are you, right? In this journey, let's put you on the map so we know where you are. And then that trust building allows us to say, look, we have an idea where you are. We know where you want to go. We can get you there. You're going to have to trust us. Here's the process. If they don't trust us to even lay out the course, then we can't really help them. They're not ready for our work yet. And that's okay. That doesn't mean that they're bad people. It just means that, like Karen said, we aren't the right one for you, at least not at this time.
That's awesome. Thank you for both of your responses. I think we have time for one more. And so just as a bit of a follow-up to the conversation around the makeup of DEI teams, Dr. G had an excellent follow-up in the chat. If you didn't have a chance to catch that when he sent it through, he said employees need to speak up when their DEI teams are mainly white and male. Leadership often takes silence as compliance, and simply asking, isn't this counterproductive? Which is fantastic. And kind of as a follow-up to that, Dr. G also once made the point and has, throughout our sessions, that businesses need to invite people of color to the table for their other areas of expertise outside of diversity and inclusion. And so often those become, token roles, especially token leadership roles in companies. And just curious, if you see that happening more in companies and organizations that you work with.
I think the general answer will probably no. The reason is people typically approach diversity as they want the nice picture on their website, but they don't want the soup to have a different flavor, right? They don't want the change that diversity brings. And that is simply impossible. It's like if you add somebody to your house, a new baby, a new pet, an elderly parent, a roommate, whatever it is, somebody comes into your space, the space is now different, right? There's stuff where it wasn't before, the smells, the sounds are different, right? It's not all bad, but it's not all good. But either way, like, you can't do that. So what happens is, particularly with you have those mostly white male leadership teams, an employee is not going to have the leverage, a Black employee, let's say, is not going to have the leverage to come in, speak to their bosses to tell them, y'all acting a fool right now. This is stupid, right? Because if they do, there might be negative repercussions, right? And so if you're in that place where you're all white and, you have some other diversity issues where race, gender, ethnicity, generational diversity is lacking, you need some help. Like, you need some help because you need somebody who doesn't work for you to be able to come in and tell you to your face, you're not doing this right. You need to change your approach. So I would say that, if I don't see people doing that, because I don't think they understand being pluralistic requires new muscles, and that's scary for people. So I don't see it happening often.
I think that there's a market for people to coach DEI professionals because it's very lonely. There's a thought that just because you're a person of color, you understand those kinds of issues, that you have those muscles, that you know how to navigate those spaces. Being a bridge builder, a mediator, takes different muscle skills, background, and experiences. And so I think people grab for people too quickly. And what they become is sort of the sounding board. If you say this, then all people of color think this, so we're safe. And in some of these cases, they feel like DEI professionals are insurance plans. As long as we've got one, we're not going to get in trouble. But how many of them have line authority? How many of them have a budget? How many of them even have an executive assistant, administrative assistant? How many of them can hold accounting, marketing, legal accountable for hires and changes? And I just also think when you're dealing with folks who've been disenfranchised, we just are creative and we're often pigeonholed, and people turn to us to ask us the diversity questions. But, as I said in Harry's introduction, his master's is in transformational leadership, not in helping white people understand Black people, having Black people navigate. I mean, Harry's graduated from the same school I received my doctorate from. I mean, we're being trained to create water systems in third world countries if we need to, or to stop sex trafficking, in South Asia. Like our training is much broader, but what people will see is what people see.
Thank you for that. That was fantastic. To all three of you, thank you for all of your input and insight. We are going to wrap up the Q&A, hop over to a couple of our other sections, and then regroup for a quick wrap up. But I'd love to invite Siobhan to take over now and highlight a few of our upcoming educational and volunteer opportunities. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Samantha. As always, whenever I get a chance to be a part of leading into Allyship, I get the pleasure of bringing back that educate, affiliate, donate. Donate is always a great way, but starting with educate, our Black History course that we've mentioned several times today, we do have our fall cohort dates set. If you are interested, or if you're already signed up, just as we already say, with allyship work here at LIA, bring more people into that course with you. It's some of the best information and knowledge that you can have as an ally. You mind going to that next slide? Again, donate, not just monetarily, although those concurrent donations to Nehemiah is what helps us stay doing what we do, but also making smaller donations in the form of more mutual aid projects. The 14th annual Back to School Bash is coming this August. It's a huge process run by Miss Jackie Hunt, in which we provide students with the essential supplies that they need, and those supplies are all donated. So if you have kids, or if you're an empty nester now and you still know how to find all those school supplies, get over to volunteer@nehemiah.org and sign up to be one of those providers. And then lastly, of course, affiliate, mobilize. If you've already taken the Black History course, maybe you'd like to facilitate this time around, reach out to myself through the volunteer email. But also do works within your own community. Part of what I like to do is remind people, especially the volunteers that work with us, that when they volunteer here, it's amazing, but when they go out and create mutual aid within their own communities or communities near them, that makes an impact as well. So mobilize. And if you don't already know, volunteer@nehemiah.org is how you can reach myself to get involved.
Awesome. Thanks, Siobhan. So just to wrap up, at the end of every event, what we always want to iterate, and Siobhan already talked about it, right? The 3 pillars of allyship is educate, donate, and affiliate. And we always like to wrap up and talk about how it's a verb. It's all about the action that you need to take. Coming to these events is good, but it's about what are you doing outside of these events. And so Juneteenth obviously was just 2 days ago. Hopefully you saw in the promotional email different events that you could attend. But what we're actually asking you to do is to research the history of Juneteenth a little bit more and reflect on your experience with it. When did you learn about it? Most people have learned about it in the last year or two. Why is that? What do you do on that day? Take it to learn a little bit more about it rather than maybe I got a day off from work that day. Or maybe there was an article posted at work where you work about that. And then also based on the theme of tonight, find out what DEI training your workplace offers. But I'm going to challenge you to go the next step and say, what did you learn here tonight that you could maybe offer them suggestions on? Maybe you could approach them if they only have unconscious bias training. Share some of these learnings with those leaders and see how you can start to influence the culture as Harry and Dr. Karen Reece talked about tonight. And then very quickly, we wanted to talk about a couple more quick things. So I'm actually going to let Dr. G speak about the one on the left here really quick. That's really exciting. But in the middle is White and Wondering. So another safe space for non-Black allies to come talk about varying topics on a monthly basis in a safe place so you can process the things that you're hearing about in this event or on the news, things that are happening. And then on the right, Reverend Laleta G, we shared last event that they are doing Becoming Family Staff Stories. And you're in for a treat on July 11th at noon. You're going to hear from Reverend Laleta G and in her personal experience. So something I'm really excited. And Dr. G, I don't want to take the thunder, but the new podcast, you want to just give a quick promo of this podcast and then we'll wrap up.
Sure. Man, just when I think I don't have any more capacity to do anything different, I see an opportunity to really pass knowledge on to others. But one of the important elements of leadership is that you reflect on mistakes you've made, on challenges you faced, on successes that you have. Because my belief is that leadership is a lifelong development opportunity, which means today's successes don't define me. I need to get up tomorrow and do it over again. And today's failures don't limit me. I can overcome. And so I'm just taking this time. This is really a brainchild of Harry Hawkins. I really appreciate him for doing this. But it's just sharing lessons that I've learned from leading this nonprofit for 30 years, having created it, carried it as an idea for about 2 years, then actually created it in 92. And now it's 30 years later. And we're going to be celebrating our anniversary in November of this year. We want all of our Lean Into Allyship friends to come. I probably jumped ahead and took someone's thunder, but we want people to save the date. Dan, I want to see you.
I will be there. I will be there. I promise.
All right. I want to be able to see you, but I'm just excited about sharing leadership anecdotes. And they're not Black leadership anecdotes. They're leadership anecdotes that are shared through the lens of a Black male. So I'm very excited that this is happening. Episode 1 is out. Please take a listen and share it with people in roles of leadership. And if I could just say, I probably get ahead of myself anyway, but I'm shameless in this plug, Dan. We're talking about DEI work. I just recently interviewed 2 DEI executives. They're a married couple. Dr. LeVar Charleston is the DEI director at University of Wisconsin-Madison, and his wife, Sherry, is the DEI executive at Harvard University. And so Don's going to be dropping a link for that. It's in there already for the Charlestons. So just take a look at that, because the way people of color who are in these DEI roles think differently than perhaps ones that are filled by other people. So thank you, Dan. Please listen up. This is a part of how you educate.
Awesome. And then the last thing that I also, so again, I know we've also shared the Justified Anger podcast, but also wanted to reiterate the Black Like Me podcast. Obviously, it is on season 7. If you haven't listened to the first 6 seasons, I'd also recommend you go back and listen to those. So there is more than enough resources for you to educate that we're sharing with you. And again, this will be shared with you in a follow-up email, in the next few days following this event. So thank you, Dr. Karen Reece. Thank you, Harry. And again, thank you, Dr. G, for coming and sharing those insights, sharing how the DEI training is so much different than what I know. And I think what a lot of the attendees know in their organizations, if they even have that. So thank you again for your time and insights. So with that, if there's anything else, Dr. G, that you want to close up with?
No, I just, there's just so much going on in the world. Don't put your head in the sand. Look at it, address it, talk about it with friends, engage people, be a part of the change, folks, that we want to see. Be a part of the change, because that's how it happens. One conversation, one ally, one opportunity at a time. So be a part of the solution, please. And get ready get your schedule.
Yes. Yes.
Your schedule.
So mark your calendars for July 19th. We're extremely excited. So Reverend Laleta G will be coming back and she'll actually be hosting. So we're flipping the script. She will be the host and there's going to be a panel and it's titled Black Women on the Move. So we are still working on who those panelists will be. But again, another incredible event coming up. We're really excited. And so just stay tuned for who the panelists will be. We'll get that, finalized in the next week or two. We'll make sure we get all that information out to you as well. So thank you for spending your evening with us and we'll see you in middle of July.